Welcome to this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Andrew Seidel, the Director of Strategic Response here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
And I'm Elizabeth Cavell, an Associate Counsel here at FFRF. And as usual, if you've got questions about what we're talking about today or any questions related to FFRF, just type questions in the comments here, or you can email them to askanatheist@ffrf.org.
Today we'll be talking with FFRF's newest addition, Mark Dann, our Director of Governmental Affairs. Mark will be representing FFRF on Capitol Hill as part of the Strategic Response team.
But before we get to Mark, Andrew, your book, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American, came out on May 14th. It is selling well already, and you did a tour of the Bible Belt, and then most recently you went out to Seattle to promote the book.
Seattle, we were at the Barnes & Noble in Seattle, downtown Seattle, or maybe a little north of town, and we had about 30 chairs set up and 75 people showed up, so it was standing room only. It was a lot of fun, really great crowd, really great questions. I kind of always judge how talks go by how good the questions are, and this was a very inquisitive group. So really went well, and then the total, we had, I think, 6 events over the last week, and 400 plus people come out, so it was for my first book tour, it was a lot of fun.
Great. So where are you headed to next? Are there any other stops on your book promotional tour?
Yes. So Chicago, I am coming to you on June 11th. I will be talking about the founding myth with evolutionary biologist Jerry Coyne. I'm pretty excited about that one. Then I will be in Orlando on June 30th. Speaking with the Central Florida Free Thought community. It's actually Winter Park, right next to Orlando. Boca Raton on July 1st, and then the Secular Student Alliance Conference in mid-July in Los Angeles. And then we are organizing some other dates, including Kentucky, Colorado. I'll be at the FFRF convention here in Madison.
Right, and people can find more information about all those talks and events on the FFRF website at ffrf.org/outreach/events. So far, Andrew, what's your personal favorite moment from promoting your book?
Well, so last night I got an email with a subject line that said, "You inspired me." And that was really exciting because in these talks, I try to get people active. The book isn't just how you can read and refute the myths, but what you can do next. And one of the things I'm trying to tell everybody to do is, look, get out there and run for office. As an open atheist or a secular humanist, whatever it is, get out there and run for office. Don't just sit on the sidelines. And I know people are reluctant to do that because they think, well, who's going to vote for me? How could I be a public official? But if you look at our public officials right now, you definitely can do it. And I got this email, and this woman said, after hearing my talk in Greenville, that she's going to run for her school board seat.
Wow, cool.
And so she's getting organized, she's getting signatures, and I'm really just thrilled that this book is not just changing the conversation, but also inspiring people to do things like this.
That's really great. And your book is all about the rise of Christian nationalism, the influence that it wields in the Trump administration and politics in general, and debunking all the myths that underlie it as a political theology. It
is, and that influence is really one reason that FFRF is putting resources into governmental affairs. And that is why we hired Mark Dann, our new Director of Governmental Affairs. Mark, welcome. Welcome
Good to be here.
Welcome to FFRF and to Ask an Atheist.
Right.
Wonderful.
So, Mark, before we ask you a few questions, can you just give us and our viewers an idea of your background? What were you up to before you came to FFRF?
Sure. Well, a few weeks ago, I was still very much in the secular family. So I was the Director of Governmental Affairs with the Secular Coalition for America. And we helped move forward that agenda before I came over to FFRF. And before that, I served as Federal Affairs Director for Compassionate Choices. And they're the folks who are moving around the medical aid and dying bills all over the country. I also served as a democracy development consultant in Iraq and Moldova with the National Democratic Institute. Plus, I served in the Peace Corps in Crimea before the Russian invasion. So a lot of my work in my professional career has how do we bring people's voices into the halls of power? How do we make people's voices heard? And how do we move legislation forward?
And that's something that we're really excited about because right now the courts are not really trending in our favor. So we're looking for ways that we can get more involved in government and really kind of push that in our direction. What about personally, Mark? What do you like to do for fun?
So my husband and I, we live very close to the office, and we have a small Chihuahua Jack Russell Terrier. So she was a finalist in this year's running of the Chihuahua race here in DC.
That's excellent. Now, I've been around the country on this book tour that we were just talking about, and I'm hearing this common theme. And even though I was able to inspire this one person, I'm hearing a common theme that people don't participate in the legislative process because they feel like their voice won't make a difference. And you've dedicated your career to the opposite of that. So do you agree with that sentiment?
No, I don't. But I just wanted to say that's wonderful about the woman who said she's running for office. I think that's fantastic. That so many people from our community are making their voices heard. And they're going to move forward an agenda that's very close to their hearts to help out members of their community, their local community as well. I think that if you can run for office, you absolutely should. I spent a lot of time with the LGBTQ Victory Fund that helps bring members of the LGBTQ community to run for office. So I'm thrilled that people are doing that. They're inspired. There's a clear line between people's involvement in the Women's March and people who are running for Congress. And clearly, if we look at the election results in 2018, those folks are absolutely making a difference, not only in Congress, but in local legislatures, school boards, you name it. We need people's voices, and we hope those will continue.
So you think it is worth individuals getting involved in the legislative process, contacting their local officials, and sort of making their voices heard? You as an expert in this say yes, do that.
Yes, do that. So one of my best memories when I was with Compassionate Choices, we were lobbying for the medical aid in dying bill in New Jersey. And my favorite meeting was with an assemblyman named Assemblyman Maynard. And Assemblyman Maynard, he's a big guy. Jersey City firefighter, and he thought we were coming in to talk about another bill. And when we started talking about this, he wasn't really sure about the topic, and he seemed a little hesitant about it. But the more we talked, the more we shared our stories, and the more we talked about our personal experience, he started talking about his own personal experience with a hard passing and about his sister. And we were able to bond and connect and move forward and say that what we're working on is good policy, it helps people, it makes sense. So I would encourage everyone who is one of our 32,000 donors and supporters and more to please, there's a lot of ways to get involved, whether it's an action alert or my personal favorite, and I think the one that has the most weight, is getting to know and building a relationship with your member of Congress, your local legislator. And the thing that's very surprising is getting to see and meet and interact with a staff member or a legislator is actually quite easy, and people want to hear from you. They want to hear your thoughts on this issue, and especially with a quarter of all Americans now identifying as free thinkers, I think this is a constituency as important as any other, and a legislator would be silly not to recognize that.
Absolutely.
So Mark, what about the flip side of what Andrew asked, which is I've heard people say, well, I don't need to talk to my legislator because she's really good on our issues. She always votes the right way and supports our cause. What do you say to that?
That might be true, but legislators are just like everybody else. They have a lot going on, and they have a very strong to-do list. Anyone who's a young parent or has a big family or is juggling a lot of things, there's certain things you're going to prioritize in the day, and there's other things you're going to deprioritize. The big question is, what's high on your agenda? So even if someone is a really good legislator, great. Well, can they sponsor a piece of legislation? Can they co-sponsor? Can they tweet? Can they dedicate staff time to it? Can they do a floor speech? Can they really think about how to advance this? Can they make separation of state and church issues their top legislative priority? So there's always more you can do. And sometimes I've been in offices where, yes, they support us and they say, well, that's very nice, but there's other pressing matters. And so we need your voice, we need your membership, and we need folks to get active. And that's how we can move legislation forward.
So without giving away any of our trade secrets, what are some of FFRF's biggest legislative priorities for this Congress?
So probably the biggest thing and one of the reasons why I came aboard for the Freedom from Religion Foundation is because we want to tackle the hard issues. And that's something that means a lot to me. So I think you're going to see more getting active on trying to repeal the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I think we're going to be working on making sure that religious nonprofits have to play on the same level playing field in terms of their tax breaks as secular organizations. So there's a lot that we can be doing as well. And one thing that I think is important of where I would like to see us go is if we use the Equality Act, which we support, which the Equality Act would grant civil rights benefits to all LGBTQ Americans, is that they've done an excellent job. The LGBTQ community has done an excellent job on lining up co-sponsors. Pretty much everyone in the Democratic caucus is a co-sponsor of this legislation. There are a few Republicans, but most of all, they got leadership to prioritize the Equality Act. It's one of Speaker Pelosi's top issues of this Congress. It got a lot of staff attention. It got a lot of was the priority piece of legislation from the Equality Caucus and has begun to move. So if the political winds, if there's a new president and hopefully a new Senate, then that piece of legislation is poised to move after 2020. And that's where I want to model our process and our procedures as well. This didn't take, the Equality Act didn't get where it is overnight. It took a lot of phone calls, visits, and people meeting their legislators, talking at town halls, and really talking about why is this piece of legislation important to me and my families? How does this impact my life, and sharing their story?
Yeah, there's so much more out there to navigate than just getting to a yes or a no vote. And we're just thrilled that we have somebody on the Hill who can help us do this. You know, FFRF staff members have been visiting and having these meetings, once every so often, every 6 months or something like that. But now having somebody there full-time devoted to this is really exciting. And another thing that our members have been really excited about, and me personally too, I've been thrilled about this, is the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. So, explain that a little bit and then tell us what we can expect to see from the Congressional Free Thought Caucus.
Sure. The Congressional Free Thought Caucus is the brainchild of Representative Jared Huffman from California, one of the co-chairs, and also Jamie Raskin, another one of the co-chairs as well. It has about 10 members of Congress. You don't have to be a free thinker to join. It welcomes people of all faiths. And its primary goal is to discuss separation of church and state issues and stand up for the rights of non-theists and free thinkers all across America. They've expanded their membership to 10 members, including Mark McCann in Madison, Wisconsin. And the great thing about a lot of members of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus is that they're in very key positions in Congress. So, for example, Representative Pocan is on the Appropriations Committee, and that handles how much federal dollars go into federal programs. So Lofgren, she is from California, on the chair of the House Administrations Committee, and also Jamie Raskin is he's also in leadership as well. So you have a lot of very influential members, longtime members such as Eleanor Holmes Norton from here in DC, and I think that's going to be fantastic. We meet regularly with them. We were just with Huffman's office to talk about how we can build a strategy, move legislation forward, how members can become more active. And something tells me Freedom from Religion Foundation members will be hearing more from Representative Huffman in the very, very near future.
And we did hear from him at our convention. He actually spoke at our convention in San Francisco just a couple months ago, and people can check that out on YouTube as well.
That's right. And Mark, one last question before we take a few questions from the audience.
Great.
What's the most important action that FFRF's members and supporters can take to influence legislation on our issues?
Best thing to do is get to know your legislator, and it's actually quite easy. They will tell you where is their town hall. Go to it, please. Make an appointment. Go visit them. This is really good. This is the best way to do it. And the other part is share your story. If you can't do that, of course, other forms of action, whether it's a phone call, an email, an action alert, those are valuable as well. But the thing that is really important is that sometimes a legislator might forget facts and figures and numbers, but they're not going to forget your story. They're not going to forget about why separation of church and state is important, why being an out and proud freethinker is important to you. Why does that matter? So that's what the story you can tell. And I'm really thrilled that I hope we'll be able to keep growing our membership list, encourage folks and your friends to join, because we need your voices to be heard. And as I referenced with the Equality Act, a lot of major LGBTQ groups such as HRC have 3.2 million supporters. But I know that we have 25% of the population, and I think we can get there as a community, and we can really make our voices heard.
The storytelling point is so important, too. I mean, you even hear the candidates on the campaign trail. They're always repeating stories that they've heard from, individuals. I was talking to so-and-so in so-and-so county yesterday, and they were telling me about this. So, I mean, if you do it and do it well, you might even get picked up and, become a Joe the plumber, but a better one.
That's the dream. So, Mark, if you can hang around on the line here, we're going to take some of our questions from Facebook and from our email account, and some of these will probably be best answered by you. So first, I'm going to read a question from Tyler. This is pretty broad, and we can talk a lot about it, but does the FFRF work with the Secular Coalition for America? Obviously, Mark was most recently lobbying for SCA and now has moved over to FFRF. So you can explain, Mark, how does SCA and FFRF relate?
Great. Well, I'm a big supporter of the Secular Coalition for America. They are a fantastic organization. And one of the great things that the Secular Coalition does is they help coordinate between, among, and help move forward everyone in the secular movement. They've got a great team and a wonderful workforce, fantastic volunteers. So yes, FFRF is a proud member of the Secular Coalition. We have regular coordinating meetings on a whole variety of issues, whether it was the ones I mentioned, secular recovery, vaccinations, DC vouchers. We work hand in glove with them and a lot of our other secular partners, whether it's the Center for Inquiry, American Atheists, and American Humanist Association, and many more of their other 19-member organizations.
Yeah, and I think that's important. You just noted all those organizations you just named are also members of the Secular Coalition, which is sort of that umbrella organization for us in DC. And yeah, doing great work, and we're glad to have you come specialize with FFRF a little bit.
Right. Okay, so question from Al Martin. Andrew and Mark can probably speak to this. Is it harder lobbying for secular values during this time, during the Trump administration?
Go for it, Mark. I'll jump in after.
I think sometimes people's focus changes a little bit. I think, back up a little bit. Before the 2018 election, we all thought that the Johnson Amendment would be gone. The First Amendment Defense Acts would be in place. And you know what? Those didn't happen. And that happened from people not being silent, not being scared, people engaging. Now we get to play a little bit more offensive ball. We're able to start moving legislation forward, getting things introduced, holding members of the administration accountable. So I think the interest is really high. It's just the political winds have changed a little bit more in our favor. We're allowed to do more proactive events and being able to go from a purely defensive posture to, yes, we have to defend a fair amount, and pretty much there's a regulation almost every day that pops up that certainly is very much in the religious exemption mode, but we're able to still go forward. We're building up with the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. That's certainly given us a lot more firepower, and I really think this is a great position, a great time to position ourselves for what I hope will be a very bright future.
Yeah, I agree with what Mark said. I think we are at a really interesting moment in our history where we are learning, and I think the average American can see more than ever, that secular values are American values. That the claim that we are based on Judeo-Christian principles and the Judeo-Christian principles that you're seeing implemented by the Trump administration, hate, bigotry, all of this discrimination that they are trying to codify, Christian nationalism, trying to elevate Christians to this privileged class and everybody else relegated to a second-class status. We're finally seeing that those values are un-American. I mean, I talk about this a lot in The Founding Myth. It's what the book is about, essentially. But we're really at, I think, a point where it's becoming clear to the average person, not only that Christian nationalism is a threat, but that secular values are American values.
Right, right. We're seeing the agenda of discrimination, of sort of political retribution, all of these really just un-American political values that are really drawn from a Christian nationalist theology. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. Someone just comments, we're very happy to have you on the FFRF team, Mark. That's from Altino, so cheers to Mark.
Agreed.
Thank you.
This is a somewhat off-topic question that I'm going to throw out there, and we can maybe not answer it, but talk about what it's about. So since you're talking about lobbying, Dann, Gilliam asks, what do you think about the story that just came out about the Catholic Church spending $10 million on lobbying related to covering up priest sex abuse? I don't know if I have no idea what that's about in terms of whether or not it's related to lobbying, a lobbying effort. Anyone else can speak to that, but we can talk about religious influence, the influence of religious organizations lobbying at the federal and state level, because I do think that is a place where we have been massively outgunned and outfunded, and we're only now trying to kind of catch up with religious lobbying forces on a whole host of issues that are important to secular Americans.
I think there are two things sort of in that question. One, I'm not sure about that particular news story, but I do know, for instance, that the Catholic Church has opposed vigorously and spent lots of money in New York, for instance, to oppose victim rights acts, which would allow victims of priestly rape and child abuse to come forward. It would extend the statutes of limitations. It would allow them to sue 15, 20 years down the road. And the Catholic Church has really opposed those and poured tons and tons of money into efforts to kill those bills year after year. The second thing is that nonprofits and churches we're limited in what we can spend on lobbying,
right?
Because we are not political organizations. We're allowed to spend there's a formula. You're allowed to spend a certain amount based on your total budget, and that's why we're able to hire Mark and do some of this great work that he's going to do and fight back against these Catholic pushes.
Right. So there was one more question.
Mark, do you want to add anything?
Oh,
on
yeah,
that?
Mark. Religious lobbying.
And I think that kind of highlights the point where obviously for lobbying and lobbying disclosures, very much that we're going to absolutely comply with the full spirit and to the letter of the law and do everything we need to for compliance wherever it is. But I think it does bring up an interesting point about what a church has to report to the IRS and what your everyday the smallest nonprofit, one-person shop, why their reporting requirements are different for religious organizations. So I think this kind of points into the direction of our legislative strategy of churches, any religious organizations should be treated like the smallest nonprofit in terms of their reporting. So if people are getting a tax deduction for it, they have a really good sense of where that money is going, and they are on the same level playing field as everybody else.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's another question popping up, and then I'll ask the last question I mentioned. So the non-religious, this is from Tyler Ernster, not sure how accurate this stat is, but the non-religious notoriously have low polling records, turnout.
Turnout.
Any suggestions on how to motivate my fellow atheists, especially younger atheists, which are the growing demographic in our movement, to get out and vote?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that all the organizations have been looking at doing, and we've been actually working on voter registration drives. And I wrote an article for Rewire News a while back, actually right after the last midterm election, gathering some of the stats and talking about some of the things that we can do. So that'd be a place that Tyler could go read a little bit more on that. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I think a really good trend you're seeing is that activity and where people vote on court nominees with more conservative folks was always quite high. And now, especially after Kavanaugh, you're starting to see the question of who is on the courts, not just in the Supreme Court, but also in other federal courts, start coming up as a major issue. You are seeing a lot of other candidates for federal courts that are just kind of being waved through. And a lot of folks who are more progressive, who are more secular minded, are definitely paying attention to this trend. And I think you're going to start seeing people voting much more on it as well. And the idea that folks like Mike Pence get to control the rules of the debate, well, that's changing, and you're going to see more of it going into 2020 and beyond.
Great. Was that the last question?
Yes, it was.
Okay, well then that is our show for today. Thank you so much for watching. We invite you to become a member of FFRF to help us in our vital work to keep state and church separate and to educate the public about the views of non-theists. You can do it right on our webpage, ffrf.org.
And one way you can help FFRF and help Mark in his work on Capitol Hill is by contacting government officials who violate the law. If you want to receive FFRF action alerts on your smartphone, text FFRF to 52886. Data rates may apply. Again, that's FFRF. Text it to 52886.
Mark, thanks for joining us, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you for next week for another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.